Hi, welcome to prayercommunicationwithgod.com. Thank you for joining me today, and I'm trying something a little different. In today's post, it's going to be part video, part PowerPoint, and just all combined, because today's lesson seems to cover a great deal of detail, and I'm trying to bring it to you in the most understandable way. Today we're going to be looking at Numbers chapter 2, which covers the arrangement of the camps of the tribes of Israel, which goes along with the census or the count that God had Moses do of Israel. As we read Numbers 2, we learn that God first mentions Judah and places him to the east of the tent of meeting. Next is Reuben, which is south. Then Ephraim is west, and Dan is to the north. And as we look at this has some significance to it. So that's why I'm going to do the PowerPoints, because I want to break it down. And I do believe that as we go through this, we will see that the placement of these camps has a lot to do with our journey in life. I know as I was researching and digging and studying to bring this post to you today, I could see some part of each tribe within myself. And as I sought out and dug into how God placed them, the way He did, east, south, west, and north, and why they're mentioned in this order as opposed to the way we generally say it here in America, north, south, east, and west. It has great meaning, and it just seems to go along with our journey of life. And I hope that I'm able to bring that to you today through this lesson. Pray I don't lose you too much. Research is really my thing. I can dig it out. Sometimes I have a little difficulty getting it out to you in a way that's understandable. But it is my prayer that God uses this lesson to speak to you, to bring abundant life to you. So, let's begin this journey. I don't believe I've ever dug so deeply into Numbers before, and I know I've never connected with it in a way that I have today. I actually had hoped to have this post to you before now, but it was just such a deep lesson that it's taken me basically all day to put it together, which is what I'm still doing. But may you be blessed by it. And again, thank you for joining me. Here we're looking at the Malchut of Hod. Walking humbly is walking tall. Dignity is the essence of humility and modesty. The splendor of humility is majestic and aristocratic. Humility that suppresses the human spirit and denies individual sovereignty is not humility at all. Does my humility make me feel dignified? Do I feel alive and vibrant? Teach someone how humility and modesty enhance human dignity. This is taken from a spiritual guide to the Omer by Simon Jacobson. And this fits perfectly with Numbers 2 because, well, in short, Israel is the Malchut of Hod. They do walk humbly, yet walk tall. Their dignity is in the essence of humility and modesty, and their splendor is majestic and aristocratic. But this doesn't just apply to Israel, it applies to us as well. So let me ask you, do you feel dignified? Do you feel alive and vibrant? Or do you feel like you have a dark cloud hanging over your head? What part of the journey of life are you in? Which encampment are you resting in today? Let's dig a little deeper and find out what the arrangement of these encampments of Israel around the tent of meeting tell us about where our life is today. and what we can do to progress through it, to be more in the image of God. For each of us are created in the image of God. But we've been duplicated and pressed and wadded up and tossed to and fro by the circumstances of life. And so I'm not so sure everyone can see God in us at all times. So that's what we strive for, to perfect that image of God, to allow His light to shine through us so brightly that there's no question for others. And, some of the Christians I've encountered in my walk, I've just looked at them and said, Lord, help them, because your word promises us an abundant life, and yet they're so beaten down that it doesn't draw anyone to you. So what is our walk showing others? Are we showing others that God provides for us, that He's there for us, that He loves us? Or is our life flashing a neon sign to them saying, run the other way, don't come to God, or you're just going to have this black cloud hanging over your head? Have you ever thought about it? I do. I do think about it frequently. And in doing this Omer count this year, and in studying numbers the way I have today, I feel I am connecting with God in a much bigger way than I ever have before. And I want you to connect with Him in the same way, or even in a better way, so that our humility is splendorous, so that it is majestic and aristocratic, and it draws others to God. It doesn't push them away, but it pulls them in. It makes them desire what you have. Not necessarily what you have in this physical realm, but what you have in the spiritual realm, in your relationship with God. Numbers 2:2. The sons of Israel shall camp, each by his own standard, with the banners of their fathers' households. They shall camp around the tent of meeting at a distance. They shall camp around the tent of meeting at a distance. If we go back to Strong's Concordance and look this up, we go to Strong's H2583, and we see that it's a primitive root, and we compare it to 2603. Properly to incline, by implication to decline, of the slanting rays of evening, specifically to pitch a tent, to encamp, for abode or siege, abide in tents, camp, dwell, encamp, grow to an end, be, pitch tent, rest in tent. Now if we look at H2603, we see it's a primitive root, properly to bend or stoop in kindness to an inferior, to favor, bestow, causatively to implore, i.e. move to favor by petition, beseech, fair, be or find, show favorable, be, deal, give, grant, gracious, graciously, entreat, be merciful, have or show mercy on or upon, pray, make supplication. So you see, it is in the camp that we are able to come to God. God is shining upon us like the slanting rays of the evening. We pitch our tent there with Him, and we ask Him for His favor, and He shows us His favor. He shows kindness to us, just as 2603 says to bend or stoop in kindness to an inferior, to favor or bestow, to show favorable, to grant or be graciously entreated, show grace, show mercy. This is what God does for us. This is what God did for Israel. He kept them at a distance to the tent of meeting, because that's his dwelling place. But he kept them close enough to him that his favor and mercy rained upon them, stayed with them, was a part of them always. And that's where we are. We are encamped at the tent of meeting, and we can come to him and ask him for his mercy. We can pray and make supplication for ourselves and for others. We see in Numbers chapter 2 verse 3 that God is starting out with the east side. So let's look at on the east side. It's the front of place, the forepart. It could also mean time or antiquity. So it's not necessarily just a direction or just a place, but it could be a measure of time. So for us, let's say we're starting on the east. Our time frame here is the time that we came into our relationship with God. And it is here that God shoots forth beams from himself to us. He opens up his word for us, and he helps us to learn more about him. And as we learn about him, as this foundation is laid, then our relationship with him grows. Think back to when you met your spouse. You weren't immediately just encapsulated in love with him because you didn't know him. You didn't know anything about him. He might have looked pretty good. He was kind of friendly. But there's also axe murderers out there who can present themselves in that way. So you had to spend some time with him, and you had to get to know him in order to fall in love with him. You had to build a foundation in order to have a relationship with him, have something to build upon. And that is what this east side is representing for us. It is representing us entering our walk with God and him who was here before time, from ancient time, revealing himself to us, revealing himself through the tribes of Israel, through the encampments of Israel, through Judah and Reuben and Ephraim and Dan, and each tribe that is a part of each encampment. So this, when I think of directions, when I was in school and we learned our directions, our teacher, put up a picture of a compass, and she taught it to us in a way as of thinking of a body. North is at your head, south is at your feet. East is to your right, west is on your left. And she did this so that it would be easy for us to remember. But when God introduces us to the encampments and how he's placed them, as I said earlier, he starts with the east and with Judah. And then he goes south to Reuben and west to Ephraim and north to Dan. And when he does this, he is starting with the right, and each one he names after that is to the right of the one before it. Each one is to the right of the one before. We start with Judah on the right side of God on the east, and we move right to Reuben in the south, and we move right to Ephraim in the west, and we move right to Dan in the north. What significance is this right movement? Is it about duality and right and wrong? What does it mean? To me, when I see that God places Judah on his right side, and then each one that he names afterwards moves to the right, it is that he is showering his mercy upon the tribes of Israel. Just as we have two sides, a right and a left side, God has a right and a left side. And we've been taught that God's left side represents his judgment, his right side represents his mercy. And we know from Scripture that Jesus sits at God's right side. So, with each of these starting from God's right and moving to the right throughout each cycle, each phase of life, we are walking through God's mercy. How awesome is that? He loves us enough that He doesn't begin with judgment. He doesn't point out every flaw that we've done wrong, every sin that we've committed. Instead, He lovingly shows us mercy and guides us through the changes that we need to make and allows us to choose when we're ready to consider that change and then to choose when we're ready to take our first action step in making that change. God is so loving and so merciful, and that is what we are learning here today in Numbers 2. We can see, it's a visualization for us to see how merciful and how much He loves us. And remember, in the newsletter, we talked about the census and taking account, and was it a numbers game? But no, it wasn't that. It was to let each individual of Israel know that God loves them individually just as much as collectively. And He brought them the Torah here in the wilderness, in the desert, so that it was available to all, and not one person could lay claim on it. Not one community could lay claim on it, but it's available to everyone who is willing to reach out and take hold of it, to choose to walk into it, to choose to keep the Sabbath, to choose to keep each of His commandments. It's there for us. It's there for the taking. The choice is simply ours. But God is merciful and loving enough to allow us to make that choice. So think about this today as we continue with this lesson, because I've still got a lot more to bring about. But I really want you to think about His love and His mercy. Think about where you were when you entered into your relationship with God. Not necessarily physically where you were, as far as what building you were in or what church you were a part of, but where you were in your life. What was taking place? What were some of the things that you were doing? What kind of person were you then? And what kind of person are you now? Has your relationship with God moved you to be a more compassionate, a more loving person? Or have you moved on to the judgment side, and are you more judgmental and more critical of others? Do we remember where we come from in terms of where we're at now? When you look at someone else, do you remember where you came from? And do you show that compassion to them? Or do you say, nope, I'm not socializing with you because you're not where I'm at? Let's think about it. What do we show? How are we introducing others to God? Because the first introduction doesn't come necessarily through the words that come out of our mouth or from the Bible study that we've learned that teaches us how to evangelize to others, but it comes through our actions. It comes through the compassion and the love and the mercy that we show to others.